Hello, today we are going to be talking about the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. What are the Synoptic Gospels? So, three books explain events in a similar point of view or under the same general aspect. So they all talk about different stories, and here's just some examples. Jesus getting baptized and being tempted, calming of the storm, feeding the 5,000, second coming, prophecy, empty tomb, great commission, first disciples of Jesus, and a lot more. John covers a different time span. He talks about Jesus in Judea. John shares a very important perspective, which we'll talk about later. What order were the Gospels written in? And so there's a lot of different debates about this specific topic, but a lot of things people agree with is that the Bible is not written in chronological order. But it is proven that Mark was written first because we know that 90% of Matthew and Luke is found in Mark. Why did the Gospels disagree? For contradiction, for different translations, reordering of events, and different perspectives. So we're going to talk about Mark's passion. We're going to go through each of them. But the first one is that Jesus was a modeled servant. Mark goes from Jesus' actions to his teaching. Mark asked the question, is Jesus really the Messiah? And why did Jesus not overthrow the Romans? In fact, why did he get killed by them? Which is a very valid question. But chapter 1 through 8 talks about who Jesus is. Mark talked a lot about the good news, Jesus getting baptized, Jesus healed people, told them to keep quiet. Chapter 8:27, Jesus asked his disciples who they thought Jesus was, and he explained how he will die. But through this, Peter was startled and kind of said out a comment that was actually from Satan. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, to Peter, implying that Satan was talking to Peter, trying to convince Jesus that he wasn't really going to die. So that was kind of something that was interesting. Satan spoke through Peter, and Jesus kind of just said, get behind me, Satan, implying that he was not listening to what Satan had to say. But Mark also told the parables. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Faith is like a mustard seed. The disciples are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Mark shared that Nazareth is where Jesus grew up. Jesus ate meals with the tax collectors and sinners. Jesus last week was spent in Jerusalem and Judea. Overall, Jesus was the ultimate Messiah because of his sacrifice, and he was risen from the dead. Matthew's passion. So Matthew said Jesus is the teacher, the good news, aka Israel's king. Kind of want to go into this one separately, just wanted to talk about the different chapters. So chapter 1 through 3 was talking about the history of Jesus, the connections. So Jesus was a Messiah from the line of David to Moses to Jesus being the Son of God. 4 through 7, Jesus announces God's kingdom. Jesus brings kingdom into people's lives, shares the expectations that people had for Jesus, talked about the religious leaders hating Jesus. No surprise there. But Jesus asked his disciples who he thinks he was. Same thing with kind of Mark talking about who am I and kind of getting those questions out. The value system, Jesus was saying to forgive, to gain wealth by giving it. It was kind of just things they weren't used to. Like you give and you get from giving. Jesus tears down tables because he was angry. The temple was kind of a form of hypocrisy. This made people want to kill Jesus even more. But Jesus weeps over Jerusalem and tells the disciples a prophetic word about how he's going to die. And then the finishing chapter was about Jesus celebrating the Passover meal and bread as a symbol, aka communion. But Matthew shows that Jesus' death was not a tragedy or a failure. This is very important. Jesus was judged on other people's behalf. And he ends with Jesus being risen in the good news. So Luke's passion. Jesus filled the covenant of Israel, the whole world. He was a perfect man. Luke and Acts come from the same author. Luke was named by Paul as a companion on his travel sign in Rome. Chapters 1 through 2 talks about John and how he was born, and how Zachariah was very surprised about having John because they were old. And he kind of connects it back to Abraham. When Abraham had Isaac, it was the similar situation where God had used John for a very good purpose. Same with Isaac. But chapters 3 through 9, Luke talks about Jesus' mission. 9 through 19 shares Jesus' long journey to Jerusalem. 9 through 24, Jesus' final week in Jerusalem leading to the death and resurrection. Luke talks a lot about the eyewitnesses and emphasizes Jesus' praying, showing that he has humanly emotions just like all of us. And to close out, I just want to talk about John's passion. John is known for being the gospel of Jesus' deity. John presents Jesus as human flesh. John is about perspective. From above downward, John begins in eternity past with the Word, who was always with God and with who from eternity was God. He shares the Word was made flesh and made dwelling among us, and we beheld his glory. 90% of John is independent. This is kind of what it separates him from the Synoptic Gospels alongside of the time zone. He had very few quotes about the Old Testament, but he talked about the I am statements, that Jesus was the light of the world, the door, the good shepherd, the resurrection, the life, and that Jesus had shared with them he is the Son of God. And that